People, we're back in Portsmouth and today we're asking questions for Jo Morgan, the founder of Engendering Change.
I hated school, I really didn't like it. I was very rebellious, did a degree in theology and religious studies. I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. My experience at school was not positive. I remember being taught sex education by a nun, and it was just ridiculous. There's potentially a lot of moral hysteria around talking to young people about sex, pornography, LGBTQ issues. You know, there are some parents and other adults who think that we shouldn't be having those conversations. We've just seen the government in the last few weeks release their draft guidance on statutory relationships and sex education. It's deeply concerning.
We're rocking. Jo.
Hi.
How are you?
Really good, thank you. Yeah, busy, bit mad at the moment, but good. Going to Spain tomorrow, so very happy about that.
Nice, sounds good. Well, yeah, thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
Thank you for being on our show. And thank you for inviting us in your home as well. It's lovely.
You're welcome.
Lovely place. So yeah, cool. So on this show, what we do is we like to give it over to the guests. We like to give it over to you. So, in a nutshell, who is Jo Morgan?
Well, I'm the founder and CEO of Engendering Change. So that's my current kind of job title and what I've been up to. Prior to that, I was a teacher for 15 years. And during that time, I did quite a lot of quite groundbreaking and progressive stuff, which got quite a lot of attention. And I started my kind of side hustle of speaking at conferences and doing training until a couple of years ago I was able to leave teaching and set up Engendering Change.
Nice. That's nice. Okay, so let's go back. So where did you grow up? What's the beginning for you?
So I'm a Pompey girl, born and bred, proudly so. I went to St Swithin's Catholic School in Southsea and then to St Edmund's Catholic School. And then I went to South Downs College and then moved around a little bit, but ultimately realised that Pompey's where it's at and came back to the motherland.
Really? Did you never think to leave, or was that never on the cards?
Yeah, I remember when I was a teenager saying, I will never live in Portsmouth, you know, absolutely not, it's sad, I won't be here. And then moved away and was like, actually, it's got a lot going on and I love it. And I'm really lucky that all my family are here, all my friends, and it's a great community. And I think it's been great seeing Portsmouth just getting more and more interesting and creative over the last few years.
I agree. There's a lot more stuff, even since I've been here.
Yeah.
Wow, I've been here on and off for about 10 years now.
Yeah.
It's changed. Okay, so you said you grew up in Portsmouth. Was your plan always to become a teacher?
No, again, I also remember at school saying that was a job I would never do. So I've completely gone back on everything that I said and kind of swore as a teenager. I hated school. I really didn't like it. I was very rebellious, had quite a problem with authority figures, I think it's fair to say, really naughty at school. And so I just wasn't happy there and I didn't enjoy it really. And it came as a great surprise to me later when I realised that that was the career that I wanted to do. Initially, I went to uni to do psychology and I was really interested in criminal psychology. But I dropped out after about 3 months. I was in London and I just wasn't really ready for it. I'd been travelling in Thailand, living my best life, and tried to come back and get on with it, and I just wasn't ready. And after a while of just kind of messing around and, you know, wasting time really, a job came up at what was then City Boys School as a classroom assistant. And so I just kind of applied for it. I didn't give it a huge amount of thought. And that was when I realised that actually I love being around young people and I wanted to teach. So I went back to uni and did a degree in theology and religious studies, which again is not what anyone would have expected. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God, but I loved my RE lessons at school because it was an opportunity to really debate and argue, and I wanted to be able to do that in an intelligent and informed way. So I kind of thought of all of the subjects that I could do as a teacher, that's the one that I felt like I could really get students stuck into and passionate about, whatever their individual perspective.
Okay, so you went and you became an RE teacher.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to touch on that then. So when you was in school, you said you was rebellious.
Yeah.
How rebellious are we talking here?
I mean, nothing too bad. You know, I always thought I was actually quite a good girl, but I seemed to get myself in trouble a lot. It was never really intentional, but I suppose I've always been someone who pushes the boundaries and, as I say, finds it quite difficult to just conform and do what you're told and not challenge things. So I spent a lot of my time at school challenging teachers, being quite leery, getting in arguments with people and just raging against the world, really, I think.
Really? So you've never really had a good relationship with authority?
Not really, no. So again, it was ironic that I went on to become a teacher. I always hoped and I believe that I used my perspective for good, and I used it to develop really good relationships with my students. So, you know, rather than going into it to then become the authority figure, for me it was about going in and doing a better job than a lot of what I'd experienced.
I see. You said you was an atheist, or you said you are an atheist.
Yeah.
How was that, becoming an RE teacher?
Again, not your usual route to it at all. And on my degree, I was the only person on my course who didn't have faith, which at times was a little bit tricky, I'd say. But I really enjoyed it. I loved my degree. I went back to uni when I was, 21, I think, and I was really ready by then. I was a total nerd. I studied really, really hard. I loved debating all of what we were learning with my colleagues on my course. I thought my lecturers were absolutely brilliant. And it's not that I hate religion. I'm genuinely fascinated by religion and by human behaviour within religious context. So I'm particularly interested in cults and the way that religion can be used to manipulate people. I was absolutely fascinated by India and Thailand and Eastern religions. So it wasn't just going into it with a critical perspective, but also genuine curiosity. And I was always open-minded if there was a religion that would come along and kind of make me feel like that was the right one, but it never happened. I think I'm too, again, maybe it's the issue with authority, but every religion I've looked at, there's something within it that I don't agree with, or I think has the potential to cause harm.
Okay. Interesting. So religion's not for you.
No.
That's fair enough. So, okay, you've become an RE teacher. How was that for you then? So you said you really enjoyed it. How was it being a teacher for you?
Well, I was really lucky because at the end of my degree, I got pregnant, which was not planned. That wasn't the lucky bit necessarily. So I was finishing my degree and doing all my exams pregnant, and I had a place to do a PGCE, which is your year kind of qualification to become a teacher, which I then knew I wasn't going to be able to do. So it was, I finished uni. I was really lucky. I graduated with a first class degree, and then I had my baby, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen or how I was then going to get back into it. And the degree I did wasn't a teaching degree at all. It was just the academic side. But when my baby was 3 months old, my dad worked at Portsmouth Grammar School, and he said to me, a job's come up as a part-time RE teacher. And being an independent school, you didn't have to have the teacher qualification to start there.
Really?
So I went along not as a qualified teacher. I'd had some experience in a previous school, and the interview was so hard because my baby was 3 months old. I was breastfeeding him exclusively. He would never take a bottle or anything like that. And the interview was about, 4 or 5 hours long. And so I left him outside. I went in, I had to teach a lesson, and I only had 24 hours notice as well, because I wasn't actually successful the first round. Someone else dropped out. So it was just this mad kind of panic. But I got the job, and I was so chuffed that it was like all my worries about the uncertainty meant then I was in there. And it was part-time, which was amazing for me at that moment in my life. And so I started, and it was just a case of fake it till you make it. You know, you just go in, brazen it out, act like you have the authority and you know what you're doing. And over time I became full-time, and then I was promoted to head of pastoral curriculum, which included sex education, well-being, all the kind of pastoral side of young people's education, and then later head of well-being, and then diversity and inclusion. So yeah, it was an amazing 15-year journey in that school.
Interesting. I mean, okay, I want to touch on that. So you said, how old did you become pregnant? You said, so you was like fresh out of uni, last year of uni.
Yeah.
How was that as a young woman to become pregnant and be uncertain of what's going to happen for you and your baby?
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, I was in a relationship, and I was living with my boyfriend at the time. I think we might have been engaged anyway. So we were, you know, pretty settled, and he was a teacher himself, and so we kind of just worked it out. And you know, I think it's always difficult for the woman in particular with the worries and uncertainty around your career, and you know, working out what it's going to mean and how you're going to navigate it. But I was just really happy, and I just felt really lucky, and it was a great time in my life.
Nice. Okay, so RE, you're teaching it. Sex ed. What's your fascination or interest in that? When did that spark?
Yeah, it has become my absolute passion, sex education. And although with Engendering Change we do loads of different work around equality, diversity, inclusion, mental health, with businesses and schools, sex ed is my absolute thing. You know, when I get to talk about that, teach other people, train teachers, I love it. And my experience at school, in a Catholic school in Portsmouth, was not positive at all. So I remember being taught sex education by a nun, and it was just ridiculous. You know, the poor woman, as I've said, I was quite a leery teenager, and I just challenged her. The rest of the class were laughing. At best, it was just a joke. At worst, it was really quite dangerous because it was completely heteronormative. You know, there was no mention of any kind of sexual relationships outside of husband, wife. You have sex for a baby, and that's it. So we weren't allowed to learn about contraception in any way. And I even remember being in a biology lesson, and we got to the part of a video on reproduction, and there was a bit on condoms, and the science teacher fast forwarded it through this section. And I was absolutely outraged by this. Probably one of the things I kicked off about at the time. And I just thought, you know, it's akin to book burning. You know, we are young people, we need this information, and you're depriving us of it. I was really lucky that my parents were incredibly open about sex. They told me and my brother, ask any questions, and they just talked openly. And so I never felt any sense of shame or taboo or confusion around the whole thing. And I'd never really thought about it as a career, even when I became a teacher. But it was later, a few years in, when I was offered the job of head of pastoral curriculum, which included sex education, that I started looking at the content and realising that it wasn't much better than what I'd experienced at school. You know, it was still very heteronormative. There was no mention of female sexual pleasure at all. You know, it was just the male body, the male erection, the male ejaculate. That was it. And I was like, come on, we can do better than this. So I just started diving into it, and I was really lucky that the school leaders allowed me, you know, the freedom and the space and the time and the resource to be able to completely overhaul it. And so alongside trying to sort out sex education and really improve it. I also set up a gay pride society in the school, which was all about celebrating difference. We were the first school in the UK to march in a gay pride parade. And so it just started kind of growing, and my profile started getting out there, and other schools started, asking for advice on what I'd done, how we'd achieved what we had, and how they could start to replicate some of that themselves.
Interesting. So that's where it all stemmed from. So 15 years of being a teacher. When or how did that come to an end?
So I had been working on my side hustle for quite a while, as these invitations to speak at conferences started increasing. I was asked to do different interviews, write articles and so on. I started to kind of think that this might be a viable career beyond teaching. And so I just kind of built that side hustle. The school were amazing in giving me, a lot of support in doing that, until ultimately I got to the point where I thought, right, I think I can make this a career. I think we've got enough clients, there's enough kind of buzz around it still that I think we can do it. It was obviously terrifying. I left a very decent salary, pension, 17 weeks holiday a year, to become self-employed. But I'm so glad I did. It's just built and built and built. And in addition to the work that we do with schools and universities, our corporate client base is growing more and more. And it's been really exciting to kind of see how that works, in addition to other things that we do in the local community as well.
Amazing. So how was that transition then? You said you had a sort of stable, client base, but how was that transition going from everything is certain to uncertain again?
It's really scary. One of the things which really helped was I was given quite long-term contracts with Portsmouth City Council as their strategic student voice and co-production coordinator. So that initially was a day and a half a week, and later became 2 days. It was meant to be, I think, 6 months, and it became 12 and then 18. So what that meant was it was, although it was taking up quite a bit of my time, it was guaranteed income while I continued then to kind of build up the client base of Engendering Change. It was also an amazing role because I met you. I connected with people all across the city. We won additional grant funding to do some really exciting projects in the community with young people. So it was just a brilliant segue, which gave me quite a lot of security until only just, I think, 3-ish months ago that I then was able to pass that on and then, really just focus completely on Engendering Change.
Wow. How's that been? How's that transition been? Because I was self-employed. That was intense, that was intense. So I can only imagine, But at the same time, it must be really exciting.
Yeah.
Because that element of, I don't know, there's no one telling you what to do. It's really exciting. Okay, so Engendering Change. Has it always been called Engendering Change?
Yeah, so back in 2018, when I was still a teacher, we hosted a sold-out national conference for teachers, which we called Engendering Change. Okay. And it was a symposium on gender and sexuality, and we had teachers coming from all over the UK. It was absolutely huge, and I think, again, for me, it was quite a turning point where I started to really see the demand that there was for the expertise that I was acquiring and the experience that I had, and how much people wanted to tap into this. So once I came up with that kind of phrase of engendering change, and of course it's got the word gender in it, for me it just felt like it really fit, because we are all about helping and empowering people, whatever organisation or walk of life they're in, to embrace positive change and to acquire the skills necessary to not just do that in a moment in time, but to really sustain it meaningfully over time. Okay. So it really fits, I think, with what we do.
I mean, what would you say then is positive change? What is positive change to you?
It depends on the context and you know, the particular need of an organisation. I think for me it's about empowerment. So rather than me coming into an organisation as a consultant and just fixing things for them, it's about empowering them with the legacy of that intervention so they then continue the work themselves. So when I go into schools and do student talks, I'm always really keen to do teacher training as well. And ideally, not just with the teachers who are delivering sex education, if that's what we're covering, but with all teachers, so that you can really kind of embed the cultural change within that organisation, so that there's a shared consciousness about what the issues are and how they can collectively grow and move towards the sort of outcome that they want to achieve. Okay. And with businesses, often the support that we'll offer won't just be going in and doing a one-off talk, but it will be about strategic support over a long period of time, to really help them to embed it, to live and breathe it, and not just tick a box of EDI or well-being of their staff or whatever it is, but to truly understand the rationale behind embracing this movement and then fully doing it.
Interesting. And how has it been for you? How has it been to embed that within a business or within a culture? How is that?
It's really challenging. It's really challenging. Every single organisation has its own idiosyncrasies, its own politics, its own structure within it. And so what we often do is we'll do a real kind of temperature check of where they are at the beginning, and then say at the end of the 12 months, we'll repeat a really thorough kind of strategic review. And sometimes over the course of that period, I'll be thinking, is it working? Are we making change? You know, there'll be some frustrations or things don't quite play out how you hope that they have. But actually then you start to see it is working. Okay. This has happened. Oh, we have achieved that. And then by the end, you get that real sense of the journey that's happening, and how they can continue that work beyond that. So yeah, it's never boring. It's always different and really interesting. And again, for me, what's important is we are truly helping them to engender change, lasting change, not just tick a box.
Okay. You say lasting change, and we're kind of like going in there. What age group would you say are the hardest to embed this change or this engendering change?
So it depends. It's a very different mission if we are working with students and children and pupils to if we're working with, you know, corporate clients and a business. You know, it's a very different kind of approach that we'd take. Our work with young people, though, through PSHE or a pastoral curriculum or whatever it is always about skills for life. And one of the first things that I'll do in sex education is get students to think about like good scales, sort of the scales of what might tip a sex life and relationships in like the right direction or the wrong direction. And what are all the ingredients that might kind of tip it either way. And what I try to help them to see is the power and the agency that they are going to have throughout their lives to ensure that their sex and relationships positively contribute to every aspect of who they are, you know, their well-being, their sense of self, their self-esteem. And actually, if we tip it in the wrong direction, it can fundamentally damage us. So for me, it's about skills for life and helping them to kind of tap into a sense of self-reflection that they keep coming back to all the time, not just when they're in the room with me, not just while they're at school, but for the rest of their lives, that they keep coming back to thinking, you know, who am I? What are my values? What impact are my behaviours going to have? And how am I going to flourish within all of those things?
Okay. What challenges have you faced then? Have you faced any challenges?
What, specifically in sex education?
Yeah, specifically in sex education.
I mean, yeah, there's loads of challenges. It's sometimes seen as a controversial subject, and we've just seen the government in the last few weeks release their draft guidance on statutory relationships and sex education. And from my perspective and the perspective of many experts in the field, it's deeply concerning what the government are proposing. It feels like a backward step it feels like it's politically motivated, and it feels as though it totally flies in the face of all of the evidence and expert opinion on what we should be doing. So there's been a lot of progress made with sex education, but it never feels like it's quite safe or established. You know, there's potentially a lot of moral hysteria around talking to young people about sex, pornography, LGBTQ issues. You know, there are some parents and other adults who think that we shouldn't be having those conversations. And I believe passionately that we absolutely owe it to young people to give them reliable sources of information and help them to explore who they are and build those skills for life.
Okay. Interesting. So I guess we can move on to equality, diversity, and inclusion. So as a white lady, how is that for you to teach that subject?
Yeah, so I'm always careful to ensure that I would never speak on behalf of a minority or marginalised group. What I want to do is amplify the voices of people from those groups. So, you know, I will go into an organisation and I would talk about EDI very broadly. I would make the business case for EDI. And I would, I might touch on issues like racism, misogyny, LGBTQ inclusion, and so on. However, what I'm really keen to do is to dive into those issues and amplify the voices of the people from those groups. And I want to use my platform to enable that. And quite often I see organisations asking people from minority ethnic groups to speak about racism, to offer training, and then not pay that person. And one of the things I'm really keen on using my position for is to change that and flip the script so that we ensure that we are listening to those voices. We are valuing people's experience, expertise, and time. And so, yeah, I've got an amazing group of, I think we're 15 now, associates who work with me and go into different organisations and focus on, you know, diving into those different issues.
That's great, by the way. But why don't you think minorities are paid to deliver that information?
I think it's about what we value as a society. You know, I think the status quo has been that people who often look the same as each other and perhaps have gone through, you know, some of the same routes as each other tend to get to the top of, you know, boardroom meetings and certain organisations. And, you know, if you think about what we believe to be quite gendered roles in the workplace, often those associated with men tend to have higher status, higher pay, and for women it's the opposite. And I think we've seen a similar kind of pattern emerge. And I would really encourage any organisation which wants to hear from someone about anti-racism or misogyny or trans rights or whatever it is, to acknowledge that in order for us to change things, we have to change that script, and we have to make sure that we pay people a good wage for what they do. You know, quite often I think people just think that people like me are just around to be kind of used and invited to things, but actually this is our job. What we're doing is really important, and we need to ensure that we prioritise it and pay properly.
Wow, it's a strong point, yeah, and it's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think it's a massive problem. Okay, with regards to like well-being then, because I didn't know that you actually covered that as well. What's been your experience with covering well-being then? Have you yourself got like qualifications in that?
So my kind of route to that has been through teaching.
Okay.
And as you know, going from being head of pastoral curriculum to then head of wellbeing and then director of D&I, as we called it then, I've kind of gone through that route, and I would say that experience has been really enlightening and really interesting. It's all right. That's okay. That experience has been really enlightening and really interesting. And it's given me quite an insight, I think, of working with literally thousands of young people over that time. My approach with wellbeing is quite a narrow approach, and I've got lots of other experts who cover their areas of expertise. So for me, the things that I focus on are often around female empowerment, which is something I'm really, really passionate about, and how we as women can give ourselves permission to prioritise our own self-care. And it's also around kind of resilience and finding your inner strength.
So building resilience for women, how do you go about teaching that?
So there's this movement called the Hype Woman movement, which I'm really into and excited about. And it's been popularised by an American CEO called Erin Gallagher. And it really kind of taps into something that I have noticed and experienced throughout my career, which is that often women are kind of put in a situation where they are pitted against each other. This sense of kind of competition with each other and actually competition with ourselves. And what Erin Gallagher argues, and I would echo, is that this is almost a symptom of the patriarchy itself, where women, rather than connecting with each other and their own power, have had to kind of fit in with a very male-dominated workforce often, and then kind of been put into positions where they are not collaborating often. So sometimes, and I've experienced this myself, sometimes you'll have women in a workplace who actually tear each other down rather than lift each other up. And the Hype Woman movement is about really celebrating other women and coming together and discovering and dictating new ways of being in the workplace. And the only way that's possible, of course, is if we're hyping ourselves. So the Hype Woman movement is about connecting with each other, lifting each other up, but actually the starting point is lifting yourself up, and it's only made possible when you can do that. And I think we often find it really difficult as women. You know, we often have very busy lives with very competing demands. We sometimes don't give ourselves permission to really kind of focus on ourselves or find ways of connecting with our own energy. And so I find that area really kind of exciting, working with women, making the case for that. But there's so much more to what we do at Engendering Change. And, you know, I've got lots of brilliant experts who I would deploy in different contexts.
Interesting. That's amazing. All right. So what are your views then? Since you've been in the workplace, how would you say the patriarchal system in the UK has been? Has it changed? And what are your overall views on it?
Well, it's interesting that a lot of young men now actually believe it's harder to be a man than a woman. And some recent surveys have kind of indicated that the Gen Z young men are not really buying feminism. They're not really buying the idea of patriarchy and that that's a reality. And many of them actually think that things have gone too far the other way. I would absolutely dispute that. And I think when you look at the evidence, it's absolutely clear that we still have such a long way to go. That doesn't mean that life is easy for men and boys. It absolutely isn't. And I'm a mother of 2 sons, and you know, I think there is really targeted work that we need to do to empower men and boys, you know, particularly around helping them to navigate social media, issues around pornography, boys and men's mental health and suicide rates. You know, these are absolutely huge issues. But for women, I also see many issues which are really pertinent and pressing, whether it's in terms of workplace equity, sexual harassment and violence, more global issues around female genital mutilation, lack of access to education, and so much more. There is still such a long way to go. And so, you know, for me, the EDI mission is about meeting everyone where they are and really empowering them to lift each other up, rather than, you know, simply dismissing a movement as done.
No, that's interesting. So with sex education, you said your parents were quite open.
Yeah.
Are you open with your sons?
absolutely. Yeah, of course I am. I would be rather hypocritical if I wasn't, wouldn't it? So I've got a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I have always taught them, about sex and relationships, women's bodies, being able to ask questions, and I think that's really incredibly important. Of course, we've got to be age and stage appropriate. I'm not coming in with all of the facts, to a 5-year-old. But what I have done from day one is taught them accurate labels for their genitalia, helped them to, ask questions and be curious, and avoided ever engendering any sense of shame, and told them always that they can come to me with questions and they can ask anything, and they absolutely do.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's really empowering. Okay, so that's what Engendering Change stands for. The book, then. How's that come? I mean, obviously, I guess everything come round and it's all in one. But how was it writing a book for you first?
It was such hard work. I can't tell you how chuffed I am that I've actually got it and I've done it, because it was really hard. So I finished teaching. I then started the part-time role at Portsmouth City Council. I was building a brand new business on my own, and I was writing a book. So that sort of year was a lot. I was so busy, but I was so stimulated as well. I think what I found most difficult about writing it was not being able to just focus on the book, So I do have ADHD, and I think that's really helpful because my brain can spin so many different plates at once, and that was what I was doing, just dipping into business, council work, book. But after a while, that does send you a little bit mad. And so as the deadline was approaching, I got myself an Airbnb in the middle of the countryside, literally in the middle of nowhere, for 4 nights, and I just did nothing other than write and finish it off. And I think without that, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So, in some ways, I suppose it was easier than writing most books, because it was the product of my years of teaching and the lessons that I'd learnt, and my absolute passion for teaching empowering relationships and sex education. But nonetheless, it was a lot.
Oh, wow. Fair enough. And you just said that you have ADHD, right? How has that impacted you throughout your career?
I think it's hard to say, really. It's hard, isn't it, to sort of have the perspective on yourself. I wasn't diagnosed until a couple of years ago. I think like many adults, it hadn't even really occurred to me. And I spoke about being a naughty child at school earlier. Maybe that was a part of that. I found it really empowering. I don't think ADHD is all there is about me, or that, I wouldn't say it's a disability in any way. If anything, I mean, some people call it a superpower, and I think for me it kind of is. Knowledge of it has been really good for me. I don't know if it would have been when I was a teenager, if I'd had that diagnosis. I don't know if I would have responded with empowerment, but now it really has been. So I just get myself more. I forgive myself more. Sometimes I find myself, talking over people, and if I'm so passionate about something, things are just coming out. Or, I mean, talk about multitasking. It's to the point of ridiculous. But actually, I do get stuff done. I am really hyper focused. So although, I can do the classic ADHD thing of massively procrastinating, when I'm in something, I'm really into it. And so I would say that it's a positive thing about me. But maybe some of my previous teachers, maybe some colleagues when I was younger might perhaps disagree.
Okay. So for you, what urged you to go and get that diagnosis? What were the telltale signs?
It was just hearing more and more about it, really. And as I did, the penny dropping, it wasn't something that I'd ever thought about or considered. And it was actually a family member who received a diagnosis, and as I was looking at it and hearing the different kind of boxes that you might tick, I was thinking, tick about so many of them. And so I decided unfortunately you have to pay because the system is just completely and utterly overwhelmed at the moment. So trying to get any kind of diagnosis on the NHS at the moment is really, really difficult. You're talking years if you even manage to.
Wow.
So I decided to prioritise it and do it, and I think overall that's been a positive thing.
Okay. And do you take medication for it? Is that a thing?
Sometimes, yeah. I know for some people it's absolutely life-changing to take it. I would say for me it's not life-changing, but I would say that it probably helps to narrow my focus a little bit,
Okay.
So yeah, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Interesting. And I forgot to ask. This is kind of going back to the original point. Not even original point, just back earlier. What are your views on gender then?
Gender? In what respect?
Like if you was gonna define gender, what is it?
So for me, I mean, obviously this is an incredibly contentious issue, incredibly divisive, really polarised debate at the moment. From my perspective, sex and gender are two different things. Your sex is a biological attribute, which we know based on someone's chromosomes, their genitals, their sex organs, their what happens to them when they go through puberty, their sex hormones and so on. So that's sex. And some people regard gender as being identical to that. From my perspective, it's something else. Gender, I think, has two aspects to it. You've got your gender identity, which is a psychological thing and how you feel within yourself, and your gender expression, which is what you show to the world. So your gender identity, you might keep that private. It might be something that other people don't know about you, but you have a really strong sense of your gender identity. And your gender expression is kind of how you dress, what pronouns people use for you, and so on. Now, I would describe myself as cisgender, which means that my biological sex and my gender identity match, like most people. But we know that many people don't have that experience. Many people have an incongruence between the two. So they might be born biologically male, but identify as female and express that, or vice versa. And because that is a reality, for me, there's no question that sex and gender are different things, and whilst my lived experience day to day means that I'm not particularly aware of my gender identity, I've listened to other people who are transgender and non-binary, and it is very clear for them that they are completely different things, and their day-to-day experience is often quite marked by that. In a similar way to being a white person in a majority white area, day to day, I don't really think about my race. It's not something that I'm confronted with. I've never thought about whether it would affect my ability to get a job or a house share or anything else. But I have a race. It's a real thing. It's just that I'm not in a minority group. And so day to day, actually, I have what I would describe as white privilege, and I would say the same thing for my gender identity. That's a different thing, of course, to being a woman and living with the consequences of patriarchy, but that's a whole other kind of debate.
Well, that's interesting. Well, cool. Well, thank you for giving us a whistle-stop tour. But that was really, really interesting. For Engendering Change then, what is the next step for you?
I think we're still working it out. It's been really interesting building it, working with more clients. We're doing our community projects, our work with schools and universities, and then our work with businesses. We've got this amazing team of associates. And so I think, I know I should be very strict on a business plan and, sticking to it. But for me, I've just loved meeting people, seeing where it's going and building it. And I've had some advice that we should, slim things down and just focus on one thing. But everything we're doing is going so well. It's working. And so I'm just really excited to keep growing it and see what happens next, really.
Okay. I'm really excited to see it. And well, thank you, Jo.
Pleasure.
It's been great. And I'm excited to see what comes next.
Thank you.
All right. Fantastic.
Yay.
Thank you.